Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 216. Hilton Farlow. Part 1. Hilton James Farlow had a number of aliases and a string of charges for false pretences and imposition in Australia and New Zealand. Hilton Farlow was born on the 10th of March 1884 in Wellington, New South Wales, to James Farlow and Alice Cooper. His paternal great-great-grandfather, John Farlow, was born in England in 1778 and married Mary Dyer on the 21st of January 1799 at Portsea in Hampshire, England. He was a dock labourer and was convicted at the Quarter Sessions held at Guildhall in Portsmouth on the 14th of January 1801 for stealing 5 iron bolts. On the 19th of January 1881, in the Hampshire Telegraph, it had an article on the General Quarter Sessions that were held at the Guildhall. Robert Farlow for stealing 5 iron bolts, transported for 7 years. He left Spithead on the 21st of June 1801 on the Canada. His wife Anne was a free passenger on board with their firstborn child Maria, who had been born only a month before. They arrived in Australia on the 14th of December 1801. By 1805, Robert had his ticket of leave and he rented 10 acres of land. They're recorded as owning 10 hogs, 2 bushels of wheat and 8 bushels of maize in store. In the 1822 muster, it showed that he had a land grant of 45 acres, all cleared, with growing 30 acres of wheat and 15 acres of maize. His livestock had grown to 140 hogs and 4 horses, with 20 bushels of wheat and 300 bushels of maize in store. Robert was granted his certificate of freedom on the 2nd of February 1811, 3 years after his sentence had expired. The administrative turmoil caused by the Rum Rebellion was possibly a factor, or perhaps his support for Bligh was the real reason in this delay. In the 1828 census, he is recorded as having 221 acres of land, with 91 acres cleared and cultivated, 19 horses and 20 cattle. Robert and Anne had 9 children. Maria, prior to their transportation, Harriet in 1805, Anne in 1807, William in 1809, Christian in 1811, Mary in 1813, Elizabeth in 1815, Robert in 1817 and James in 1820. In every respect, Robert appears to be a gentleman of exemplary character. The archives contain numerous references to him, including applications of land grants, assignment of government servants, subscriptions to the Hawkesbury Benevolent Society. In addition, he was a signatory to an address to Samuel Marsden by the Hawkesbury settlers in 1807 and an address to Governor Bligh for the principal inhabitants of New South Wales in 1808. Robert Farlow died on the 22nd of May 1853 at the age of 75, and the Sydney Morning Herald carried a notice which said that he was an old and respected colonist. His wife Anne died 1 month later on the 13th of June 1853, aged 75 as well. And in the Maitland Mercury, it states that they were much and deservedly regretted by a numerous circle of friends and relatives. They were the beloved parents of Mrs. H. Noland of Musselbrook and Mrs. W. Noland of Fellbrook. William, their 4th child, was Hilton's great-grandfather. He was born on the 29th of February 1809 at Wilberforce, New South Wales. He had a relationship with Anne Sabree that produced 1 child, Thomas Farlow, who was born on the 20th of October 1827. William Farlow then married Mary Ann Howe on the 22nd of September 1829 at St. Peter's Church of England in Richmond, and they had 8 children, including 1 set of twins, from 1830 to 1841. He was recorded in 1830 as a farmer. Mary Ann Howe died in October 1842. William had a child, Maria, with Eleanor Maria Markle, who was known as Maria, on the 9th of March 1843 in Richmond, New South Wales, and he married Maria 9 days after their first child was born. William was 34 and Maria 18 when they married, and they went on to have 9 more children. So William had a total of 19 children with 3 women. William died on the 6th of December 1864, aged only 55, when his youngest child was nearly 3. Hilton's grandfather, James Henry Farlow, was the fifth child from William's marriage to Mary Ann Howe. James Henry Farlow married Elizabeth Laycock on the 28th of April 1859 in Richmond, New South Wales, and they had 10 children. James Farlow died on the 10th of March 1900 in Dubbo, New South Wales, aged 64. Their son, James Farlow Jr., was Hilton's father. He was the eldest of James and Elizabeth's children, and James married Alice Cooper in 1882 in Orange. Hilton was their firstborn child, and as mentioned, he was born on the 10th of March 1884 in Wellington. He first featured in newspaper articles in the Wellington Times on the 15th of October 1900, when he was 16. William Sims versus Hilton Farlow. Detention of property. This was a claim for detention of 2 blankets. The defendant did not appear and the case was heard ex parte. Evidence was given by the complainant that the defendant was employed as a servant and blankets were given to him to use whilst in the complainant's employ. On his leaving, he refused to give up the blankets. Farlow had called upon him last night and agreed to consent to an order. The order was made for the delivery of the property by noon on the 15th, and the defendant to pay 4 shillings and 2 pence costs of the court and £1 1 shilling professional costs. 3 years later, on the 20th of April 1903 in the Wellington Times, Hilton James Farlow versus Walter George for alleged assault at Towery on the 31st of March, and that case was struck out. Hilton married Ethel Maud Greentree in Dubbo in 1906 when he was 22 and Ethel 20. Ethel had been born in Dubbo and they had 2 boys, one in 1904 and another in 1907. On the 25th of June 1906 in the Wellington Times, in the police court, Hilton James Farlow, on remand, was charged with larceny of £7 belonging to William Imber. Hilton James Farlow, 22 years of age, said he had been in the district for 21 years and he remembered the 12th when he was ploughing till dinner time. Between 2 and 3 o'clock he came from Maryvale to Wellington having a £1 cheque, which he changed at Hennessy's, getting 17 shillings change. He then went to see Imber at Feddle's boarding house to try and get the loan of a racing bicycle. He had been friendly with him for 2 or 3 years. He went into Feddle's shortly after 6 o'clock. He walked to the gate, and as he got near it, a man came out, whom he asked if Imber was inside, and he replied that he did not know. He next saw Feddle walk into the hall of the house, and he asked him if Imber was in, and for answer he went looking for him. Imber came out while he was outside the gate. He knew absolutely nothing about the loss of £7. After having the conversation with Imber, he went to Hennessy's, got his horse, and rode home to Maryvale. When arrested, 8 shillings was found on him after purchasing a return ticket from Maryvale to Dubbo and other small expenses. Mr. Kelly addressed the bench and, amongst other things, urged that the police had no evidence as to what had become of the £7. The magistrate sentenced Farlow to 3 months hard labour, suspension of sentence on the condition of the accused entering into securities of good behaviour for 12 months. Another penalty imposed was that the accused entered into further sureties for the restitution of the money. On the 12th of September 1908 in the Dubbo Dispatch and Wellington Independent. On Saturday night last in the Coronation Hall, a very willing boxing match was decided between Hilton Farlow and Tom Turvey. The latter won in the 5th round. 200 people were present. The fight after the first round was fast and furious, both men coming in for some solid blows, one of which knocked out the Dubbo man. On the 24th of February 1909 in the Dubbo Liberal and Macquarie Advocate. Alleged desertion. Ethel Maud Farlow sued Hilton James Farlow on the charge of desertion, and the defendant was ordered to pay £1 per week, together with £1 19 shillings costs, or in default 21 days in jail. 2 months later, in the New South Wales Government Gazette, a warrant's been issued by the Dubbo bench for the arrest of Hilton James Farlow, charged with child desertion. He's 25, 5 foot 11 inches high, stout build, fair complexion, clean-shaved, brown hair, blue eyes, usually dressed in a dark tweed sack suit and a black hard hat, a labourer, arrest desirable within the state. The 2 boys of Ethel and Hilton went into state care in 1911, and their records state that Hilton had deserted them by then. Ethel then married Leslie George Edward Smith, listed as Arthur E. Smith on the marriage record in 1927 at Ashfield, New South Wales. Leslie was a bootmaker and repairer. Ethel had 3 children with Arthur in 1911, 1913 and 1918, and Ethel died in 1942 in Auburn, New South Wales, aged 56. In February 1915, Hilton married Madeline Egan in Auckland, New Zealand, under the name of Hilton James Cooper. This information was gleaned from his New Zealand military record from 1916. On the 23rd of May 1916, the Dubbo Liberal and Macquarie advocate, Staff Sergeant Hilton Farlow, eldest son of Mr. James Farlow of Maryvale, who enlisted in South Africa and is now attached to the engineers engaged in the Arabian Desert, met his younger brother, Private Norman Farlow, who's a member of the AMC, on board the Carnier hospital ship at Port Suez on the canal. Staff Sergeant Farlow is no chicken now, as he turns the scales at 17 stone. Hilton is listed in the New Zealand Army Reserve Roll, residing at Stratford, New Zealand, in the 2nd Division in 1917. He must have returned to Australia in 1920, as he was charged with false pretences in Brisbane and was given a fine of £5 or jail for 1 month. Hilton then married Vera Ruth Erskine at Invercargill, Southland, New Zealand in 1921. They had a son, Hilton Erskine Farlow, in 1922 in Invercargill. Their son married on the 8th of May 1944 in Taranaki, St Methodist Church. Hilton Erskine Farlow married Esme Louise Simpson of Island Bay, and it's stated that Hilton was the only son of the late Mr. and Mrs. H.I. Farlow of Invercargill, and Hilton Erskine Farlow died in 1978 in Pakuranga, Auckland. By the end of 1922, Hilton is back in Australia, and it seems that Vera came with him. However, on the 20th of December 1922, in Ashfield, a warrant's been issued for the arrest of Hilton Joseph Farlow, charged with obtaining the sum of £5 from Hugh Cardington Mackay on the 1st by false pretences. The offender is 45 to 50 years of age, 5 foot 8 inches high, very stout build, 16 stone weight, medium complexion, brown hair, clean shaved, well dressed in a navy blue suit, grey soft felt hat and tan boots, smart appearance, a recent arrival from New Zealand, and poses as a hotel keeper from Gloucester, New South Wales. Complainant Hugh Cardington Mackay of Haberfield. In 1923, in Neutral Bay, a warrant's been issued by the North Sydney bench for the arrest of Hilton James Farlow, who may assume the name of Cooper, charged with wife desertion. 38 years of age, 5 foot 10, very stout build, medium complexion, fair hair, bald in front and turning grey at the sides, blue eyes, clean shaved, usually dresses well, addicted to drink. Identical with offender Hilton Joseph Farlow, complainant Vera Ruth Farlow of Military Road, Neutral Bay. By 1925, Vera was back in New Zealand, and she died on the 19th of August 1926 in Invercargill, New Zealand, aged only 32, and when their son was only 4. Hilton married for the 4th time in Queensland to Lily Sophie McMillan on the 12th of May 1924. Lily died in April 1962 at the age of 79. Only 2 weeks after their marriage, on the 28th of May 1924, in the Brisbane Daily Mail. False pretences, convicted of 2 charges. Hilton James Farlow, commercial traveller, appeared in the City Police Court yesterday on 3 charges of having imposed on William Jerks by a false verbal representation that he was employed by Clark and Fawcett and thereby obtained from Jerks car hire to Southport. Also having on the 14th of October at Beenleigh by falsely pretending to Alice Mary Casey that her son had trust in him for a wallet containing money and obtained from her £1 with intent to defraud. And on the 24th of May by falsely pretending to John Thomas Jessup that a cheque for £2 was good and valid and obtained from him £2 with intent to defraud. The sub-inspector prosecuted and the defendant pleaded not guilty. The evidence in the first case was that the defendant hired a car and for the fare gave an order on the firm of Clark and Fawcett, but when the order was presented, it proved to be false. On the second charge, the defendant, who was staying at a hotel kept by the complainant, gave the complainant's son a wallet for safekeeping. He told the complainant of this and induced her to give him £1, but when the wallet was opened, it was found to be empty. He was found guilty on 2 offences and fined £5 in default of 32 days imprisonment. On the third charge, the defendant was discharged. And an article in the Brisbane Telegraph on the 28th of May 1924 in a lot more detail. Charge of imposition, motor trip to Southport, commercial traveller convicted. Hilton James Farlow, alias H.J. Thompson, On remand in the police court today, was charged that on the 12th of April last at Brisbane, by means of false verbal representation, that he was employed by Clark and Fawcett and imposed on William Jerks with the view of obtaining benefit or advantage of motor car hire at Southport. Detective Lip gave evidence that on the 13th of May at 2 p.m. he was present at the watch house when Detective Maloney charged the defendant, who said he was employed by Clark and Fawcett and had gone to Southport to negotiate the sale of a hotel. William Jerks said that he was a licensed motor car driver residing at South Brisbane. On the 13th of April, in consequence of a telephone message, he proceeded to Milton near Castlemaine Brewery, where he saw the defendant, who got in the car. He then went to the Gresham Hotel and had a drink, and witness, at defendant's request, sent a telegram for him. The witness then drove back to the stand, and the defendant later joined him and was driven back to Milton. Witness paid him on that occasion. The defendant had made arrangements regarding a run in the car on the following Sunday. The next day, the defendant rang him up and he went to Milton. The defendant put luggage in the car and said that Clark and Fawcett had instructed him to proceed to the Tweed, where he had to make arrangements about a tractor that the firm had sold. The witness drove the defendant to the Railway Hotel at Woolloongabba, where the defendant left the car for a while. Later, the defendant asked to be taken to the nearest railway station. Witness took him to Gloucester Street Station, where the defendant and he could not get on a train until that afternoon. They then agreed that the defendant should take him down to Southport for 1 shilling 3 pence per mile each way. They went to Southport, where the defendant gave him an order on the firm of Clark and Fawcett. The defendant was put up at the Railway Hotel. The firm, however, would not cash the order when he presented it. Thomas Fitzgerald Fawcett, managing director of the firm Clark and Fawcett, said the defendant was engaged by the firm as a commercial traveller in January. Early in April, as a result of something they heard, the defendant was recalled from Roma. On the 12th of April, the defendant was asked by the witness to resign, as he had acted the fool. Defendant said it was entirely his own fault. The defendant was dismissed between 11 and 12 o'clock that day. He was not sent to Southport, had no authority to engage a motor car, and the firm had not sold a tractor to anyone in the Tweed neighbourhood. Cross-examined, the witness said that the defendant received £5 a week and expenses while with the firm. The defendant stated he resided at Brisbane, and on the 12th of April last he was residing at Milton and represented Clark and Fawcett. He rang up a motor car stand and the complainant came out. He asked the complainant to drive him to Clark and Fawcett's, and on the way they called at the Gresham Hotel, and he gave the complainant the telegram to send, saying he had to have a shave. When he saw Mr. Fawcett later, he was asked to resign, to fetch in his papers on the following Monday morning, and he would be paid what was owing. He did not say he was going to Southport on Clark and Fawcett's business. He held, though, that he was in their employ until the Monday morning, and he had not yet received his unemployment card, wages or commission due. In answer to Sub-Inspector Head, witness said that he used the name of Thompson because of a difference with his father. The Railway Department would be looking for him at the time in connection with a breach of railway bylaw that was committed in pulling the chain to stop the train at Ladley some time before. He gave no order on the firm of Clark and Fawcett. It was acknowledgement of his debt. The name of Clark and Fawcett, after witness's name at the bottom, was his address. He was married at Ipswich a fortnight ago. He could not remember the exact date. He was not engaged to a Brisbane girl. He'd been engaged to a girl in Crow's Nest, but had not disappeared. She broke the engagement off. Recalled, Mr. Fawcett said that he had finally dismissed the defendant on the Saturday morning. The defendant was to call back and adjust his affairs on the following Monday. The complainant was also recalled and denied parts of the defendant's evidence. After hearing Mr. Kay's, magistrate said that he was satisfied the defendant was guilty. He would not sentence him until the other charges against him were dealt with. Farlow was also charged on the 14th of October at Beenleigh by falsely pretending to Alice Casey that her son, John Toomey, had trust for him a wallet containing money. He obtained from her £1 with intent to defraud, and on the 24th of May falsely pretended to John Thomas Jessup that a cheque was drawn on the Bank of Australia Asia Toowoomba for £2 signed H.J. Thompson was good and valid, and he obtained £2 with intent to defraud. The defendant pled not guilty to both charges. The charge from Beenleigh was dealt with first. Detective Sergeant Lip gave evidence that he saw the defendant in the watch house on the 13th of May and told him of the charge. The defendant said, "What are the circumstances?" The witness told the defendant that he was staying at their place and had given the son a wallet to put away for him. Later he borrowed £1 on the wallet from the son and then borrowed £1 from his mother.
Thus he got £2, and when they taxed him with the fact that the wallet contained no money, he added he would go over to the bank and fix it up at once. He then disappeared. The defendant replied, "I think there was only £1, and anyhow I should call that a loan." On the 20th of May, the witness saw the defendant again and arrested him under warrant at Binley. The defendant said that he handed the wallet over for safekeeping as it contained private papers which were valuable. Then he went to the Sun and he just said, "Give me £1," and Toomey handed him one. Later he borrowed £1 from Mrs. Casey. He mentioned nothing then about the wallet. He'd never told the Sun at any time that it contained money. He was expecting money to be wired, but none arrived. Sub-Inspector Head said the defendant that to date he had never fixed up the debt or the other money he owed. "Within the last 12 months, how many valueless cheques have you issued and have you fixed up?" Inspector Head asked. He said, "I fixed up about £27 worth of cheques, which I did not know were valueless." After hearing Mr. Casey, the magistrate said that he could not do otherwise than convict the defendant. The complainant said on the date in question the defendant came into his barber's shop for a shave and had a shave. He paid for it and then said he was short of money and asked the witness to cash a cheque for him. From his face, he did not seem to be a crook, and the witness cashed the cheque for him. The cheque was subsequently returned, marked "refer to drawer." The amount of the cheque was also debited from the witness's account. Mr. Griffiths, accountant of the Bank of Australia Asia at Toowoomba, gave evidence that he understood that the manager of the bank wrote to the defendant on the 28th of April 1923, stating that his account had run out. The witness also understood that since then some further money had been deposited in the defendant's name. Mr. Hishon said that the evidence was very unsatisfactory and he would discharge the defendant. Mr. Casey asked that the defendant should be dealt with lightly on the other charges of which he'd been convicted. The trouble was that he had been drinking too much and had been too free with his cash. There was every prospect of him reforming in the future. Sub-Inspector Head said that nothing was known against the defendant in way of previous convictions. He had come up from the south 3 years ago. He is a proper trickster, the sub-inspector concluded, and there is one poor girl in the city from whom he has got different sums of money while he was engaged to her. Mr. Hishon said that there appeared to be no previous convictions and he was going to give the defendant the option of fines. In the case of imposition, the defendant was fined £5 in default of 28 days with hard labour. On the second charge, he would be fined £2 and ordered to make restitution of £1 in default of 21 days imprisonment with hard labour. The sentences were to be cumulative, and the defendant was ordered to remain in custody until these amounts were paid. He said, "I intend to pay them. I wish to clear everything up." On the 19th of September 1924 in the Forbes Advocate, Hilton James Farlow was arraigned at the local court on Wednesday on charge of obtaining money under false pretences. He's remanded till Tuesday, bail being allowed at £30 with one surety of £30 and two of £15. On the 24th of December 1924 in the Sydney Police Gazette, Hilton James Farlow, charged on warrant with obtaining the sum of £5, the property of Hugh Cardington Mackay, by false pretences, was arrested by information supplied by the Orange Police. On the 11th of February 1925 in the Port Pirie Recorder in South Australia, guilty of larceny, fine of £10, deception proved. "I've been drinking heavily of late, Your Worship, and I don't know what made me act in this way. It is the first time in my life that I've been in trouble," said James Hilton Farlow, a well-dressed man at the Pirie Police Court yesterday, charged with the larceny of £1, 12 shillings and 6 belonging to William George Nelson, licensee of the Railway Hotel. Lyle Kingston Dalton, clerk, deposed that the defendant came into the novices' stables at 9:15. He said, "I represent Massey Harris. I want a vehicle to take me to Warnertown and I'll be back by 2 o'clock. The witness supplied him with a vehicle, but the defendant did not return as promised and he did not pay for the hire of the vehicle. William George Nelson, licensee of the Railway Hotel, told the court that he knew the defendant. At 10 o'clock Monday morning, the defendant walked in and called for a drink. They had 2 drinks and the defendant said, 'Do you sell any of Seppelt's stuff?' The witness told him he did and the defendant said, 'I'm representing Seppelt's.' A little later, the defendant bought 7 shillings and 6 worth of drinks, including a round for those in the bar. The defendant asked the witness to give him £2 minus the money for the drinks and said he would give the witness a cheque for the amount. He told the witness the cheque was on the Bank of Albury. Witness said that he would take a chance. The defendant left the bar and went into the parlour. When the witness went to look for the defendant, he had gone. The witness and a policeman went to Warnertown, but the train had left the station. They went on to Crystal Brook and the defendant was arrested by 2 constables. George Stacey, painter, said he knew the accused. At 10 o'clock Monday morning, he was in the Railway Hotel when he saw the defendant. Mr Nelson asked the witness to drive the defendant to Warnertown. The defendant said, "I'm not ready to go yet. I'm going to a shop and then we'll have a drink." And after lunch, he went by the midday train. He gave the witness 4 shillings to bring the turnout back. The defendant told the witness that he was Seppel's interstate representative. Constable Badams deposed that on Monday morning, he went to Crystal Brook by motor car, and in the main street he said to the defendant, "You answered the description of a man who was at the Railway Hotel this morning who represented himself to be a representative of Seppel's." Mr Nelson, who went to Crystal Brook with witness, identified the defendant as the man who was at his hotel that morning. When questioned, the defendant said he did not remember saying that he represented Seppel's. He admitted having asked Mr Nelson for £2 and receiving £1 12 shillings and 6 pence from the latter. Witness arrested the defendant and cautioned him. The defendant made no statement, and when searched, the defendant had £1 12 shillings and 6 pence in his possession. He pled guilty and was fined £10 in default of 2 months' imprisonment. By the September, he was in Victoria and he was charged on 2 counts in Melbourne with false pretences, and he received 12 months hard labour on each charge to be served concurrently. He was released on the 10th of July 1926. Within 4 months, he features in the Gundagai Independent and Pastoral Agricultural and Mining Advocate on the 29th of November. Last week, a man whom he had known in boyhood days visited the pub and persuaded him to give him a cheque for £10 on the Union Bank in Gundagai in exchange for a cheque for £10 on the New South Wales Bank of Gundagai, the assurance being given that the stranger had money in another branch of a New South Wales bank which could be transferred to Gundagai. But investigations did not bear out the tale and the law was set in motion. On Friday, Sergeant Dice and Constable Gunther went to Coolac, and there they saw Hilton J. Farlow, 41 years old. The sergeant asked him if his name was Farlow, and the man said, "No, my name is Cooper." The sergeant said he had a warrant for the man's arrest on a charge of obtaining by false pretences the sum of £10 from Edward Pound. The man said, "That's news to me." When the sergeant read out the warrant, the man said, "Yes, that's me, I'm a damned fool." Then Farlow was arrested. On Saturday, he was brought before the local court, remanded for 8 days to allow the arrival of a warrant from Yass, where there was another charge against Farlow pending. And in the Yass Courier on the 9th of December 1926, Leonard Brothers versus Hilton J. Cooper. This was a case for misappropriating money whilst in the firm's employ as a shed overseer at Coudrevale. The amount stated was £40, 18 shillings and 11 pence. And on the 13th of December 1926 in the Gundagai Independent and Pastoral Agricultural and Mining Advocate. Pound's Pell committed for trial. The man, Hilton J. Farlow, sentenced in Gundagai Court recently to 6 months' imprisonment for securing £10 from hotel keeper Pound by false pretences, was before Yass Court on Thursday and charged with misappropriating money whilst in the employ of Leonard Brothers as a shed overseer at Coudrevale. J.R. Melian stated that the wages paid to the defendant were £41, 18 shillings and 5 pence, and travelling expenses of £5, 11 shillings. This represented all the pay that the plaintiff was entitled to. Thomas Patrick Leonard, shearing contractor residing at Yass, said on the 9th of October he engaged Cooper at £10 a week. As overseer, he would draw cheques on the Leonard brothers' behalf. At the completion of the shearing at Coudrevale, he was to move that team to Wattlevale, Bookham. The defendant did not go to Wattlevale. Alexander McBean of North Yass, a wool classer, said he went to Coudrevale and found Mr Sykes, the owner, was going to do his own wool classing. He left Mr Cooper in charge. And on the 14th of December 1926 in the Tumut and Adelong Times, Hilton James Cooper, who was recently sentenced to 6 months' imprisonment, was stated was employed as an expert and shed overseer by Leonard Brothers and was given authority to draw cheques for the payment of wages and expenses. He abused this privilege by overdrawing to the extent of £41 and 18 shillings, which he converted to his own use. And on the 4th of February 1927, he was charged with larceny as a clerk. Hilton James Cooper, 45, charged on warrant with obtaining goods valued at £3, 18 shillings and 5 pence, the property of Hubert Files Sackett, by false pretences, has been arrested by Constables McMahon and Bodle of Wagga Wagga Police. He was fined £5 with £9, 16 shillings and 6 pence costs and escort expenses in default of 3 months' hard labour. He's identical with discharged prisoner Hilton J. Farlow, alias Hilton James Cooper, alias Hilton James Thompson. He was acquitted of this charge, and then he fronted the Yass court. Hilton James Cooper, stealing £8 7 shillings and 5 pence, the property of T.P. Leonard and others at Wee Jasper. He pled not guilty and was undefended. Thomas Patrick Leonard, a member of the firm of Leonard Brothers, shearing contractors, deposed that the accused left Yass on the 26th of September for Coudrevale. Before he left Yass, I saw him at my office at Peterson Brothers' store. I told him his duties and that he was to be paid £10 per week. He went to Coudrevale. When he cut out from there, he came to Yass. I spoke to him in front of Nash's Hotel, and I later saw him at Cohen's store paying an account. I asked him to leave the books with Mr. Traynor. I did not get them. He went to Wattlevale the next day, and I got the books from Wattlevale a week later. I saw there was a deficiency. The accused had full control of the chequebook. The accused drew £5 and 11 shillings for his expenses from Deniliquin, and the accused went to Wattlevale after finishing at Coudra. I waited 8 or 9 days before taking out the warrant after I got the books. You showed me a letter from Sunshine Harvest Company offering you work. You did not tell me you wanted to get away at once. I did not tell you in Peterson's shop that I was too busy to talk to you. AJH Elliott, manager of the Bank of New South Wales at Yass, produced a copy of Coudrevale's account and 4 cheques drawn by the accused on the Coudrevale shearing account. J.R. Mellion, the accountant, had inspected the books of Coudrevale with the shearing account kept by Leonard Brothers and found a deficiency of £41, 18 shillings and 5 pence, and that the accused had overpaid his own wages by £8, 9 shillings and 5 pence. The accused addressed the jury and said the case rested on whether Mr. Leonard or himself were telling the truth in regard to the terms of agreement. Witness heard Mr. Sykes tell Mr. McBean at Coudrevale that he was doing his own classing. Mr. McBean then asked Cooper to take charge and handed the books over. When I saw Mr. Leonard at Peterson's store, he said he was too busy to discuss things. When he was asked by Mr. Leonard to forward the books, he did so. He said he drew wages at the rate of £15 and 17 shillings plus 12.5% for a week spent shearing Mr. Barber's sheep at Coudrevale. The jury, after half an hour, retired and returned a verdict of not guilty. So with his 6-month jail sentence, he was released on the 23rd of April 1927 from Goulburn Jail by remission. However, he needed to front court on the 31st of May 1927 for having been charged of falsely pretending to Hubert File Sackett at Queanbeyan on the 14th of May that he purchased a grocery business in Queanbeyan and means of false pretences by obtaining Sackett goods to the value of £3, 18 shillings and 5 pence. Constable McMahon said that on Saturday after he saw the defendant at Bull's Run, 30 miles from Wagga. He asked him if his name was Cooper and he replied yes. The witness read the warrant from Queanbeyan to him and he replied, I don't know how they make false pretences out of it because I wrote the other day for the account. Cooper was remanded to appear in the Queanbeyan Police Court on Monday. And on the 7th of June 1927 in the Queanbeyan Age and Canberra Advocate, Hilton James Cooper appeared before Mr. Forrest PM at the Queanbeyan Police Court to answer a charge of falsely pretending to Hubert Sackett that he was negotiating for the purchase of a business and falsely representing he did receive goods valued at £3, 18 shillings and 5 pence with intent to defraud. Stanley Meehan stated that I have a shop in Crawford Street. Just before the Duke's visit, the defendant came into my shop and purchased goods. On the following Thursday, he was in and told me he was a contractor and staying at McDonald's and asked for credit till the next day. He said he had something to do with the bottle company. I gave him credit, but I have not seen him until now. Hubert Sackett stated that on the 7th of May, the defendant came into my shop and asked for a quote for bread rolls. I quoted 8 pence per dozen, and he said that it was satisfactory and ordered 24 dozen. He said, I'm purchasing a business next to Mr. Allen's and intend carrying on business there. If I find things satisfactory, I'll deal with you right through. He came later, collected the order and said that he wanted a repetition of the order each day up to the following Saturday and would pay for the lot on completion of the order. On Tuesday, he said he would want a double order on the Wednesday due to the Canberra races. On the Wednesday, he only collected half the order and then came in at night and asked that the balance be put away and kept fresh until the following Saturday. He also cancelled his original order for the 3 remaining days. He never called and the rolls had to be thrown away. On Thursday, he told me he was negotiating for the purchase of a £250 block of land. I never saw him again. I took out a warrant and 9 days later I received a letter from him. I would not have given him credit if he had not represented that he was opening up business here. The goods were valued at £3.18. The defendant said, "I gave you an account on the Thursday." Charles Southey, another station Hilt storekeeper, stated that on the 6th of May, the defendant came into my shop and asked for a loan of £2. As he was a stranger, I refused to lend him the money. He said he was starting business selling rolls and saveloys, and he could deal with me if I gave a satisfactory quote. I gave him a quote and he ordered 20 dozen a day. He said he was expecting money from Sydney and it hadn't arrived. He came in, collected his order and paid for it each day up until Tuesday. On the Wednesday, he said he would pay for it when he came back from the Canberra races. That night I saw him and asked him if the order was right for the next day. He said he would come back later that night and pay. I have not seen him since and have not been paid. He told me he purchased land worth £250 and was going into business in Crawford Street. The defendant then went into the box and stated, "I came over with 3 horses from Wagga for the festivities. I saw Sackett on the 7th and said I was starting business with buns and saveloys and got a quote. I sold my goods each evening in the showgrounds. On the Wednesday I went out to the Canberra races but was not allowed on the ground. It rained Thursday night and I never came on the ground. On Friday I received a wire and started back and reached Wagga on the 20th, a week later. It cost 10 shillings a day for horse feed. Not knowing Southey's name, I wrote to Sackett for information and 2 days later I was arrested at my workplace and taken to Wagga. I had no intention of false pretences and contracted the debt in the ordinary course." The witness objected to the next question, which related to alleged borrowing of money to bail one of his boys out. Mr. Dean did not press the question. "I made only £11.05 clear on my trading." The magistrate said that he was satisfied that the case had been proved and imposed a fine of £5 together with 8 shillings court costs and 21 shillings professional costs and £9 8 shillings and 6 expenses in default of 3 months hard labour. It was allowed to be paid in instalments finishing on the 11th of July. On a further charge, Cooper was remanded until the 20th of June. In his 1927 jail record, he stated his occupation was an engineer, and it also stated that he had a bullet wound above the knee on his right leg. Hilton was jailed in Tamworth, New South Wales on the 16th of April 1928 for imposition, which he received 2 months, not paying compensations and was fined £5 3 shillings and 6 or 2 months jail, and refusal to pay compensation, which was 6 weeks hard labour. This was accumulative to 1 year in jail. So on that note, I'm going to finish part 1, and in part 2 I'll continue with Hilton's misdemeanours and also the story of his 2 sons and how they fared. As you can see with the swindlers that I've done quite a few episodes on by now, that they seem to have the same MO, and we'll go back in different states and in different parts of states in order to see whether they can be successful in swindling people.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.